22 degrees, 33 minutes north, 91 degrees, 22 minutes west. If you navigate to these exact coordinates in the Gulf of Mexico today, your vessel will sit above open, uninterrupted water. The depth sounder will register a sheer drop to the ocean floor, reading somewhere around 3,000 feet. There is no landmass. There is no submerged reef. There is no sandbank waiting just beneath the swell. There is only the deep, unbroken blue of the pelagic zone. According to modern satellite imagery, nothing exists at this location. But for 450 years, the greatest maritime empires in human history documented an island at this exact spot. It had a name, Bermeja. It was not a faint sketch on the margins of an explorer's journal. It was a recognized, legally binding geographic reality. It was measured, charted, and relied upon by Spanish galleons, British frigates, and American naval vessels. It dictated trade routes. It defined maritime borders. And then, precisely when its existence became worth 22 billion barrels of oil, it vanished. The official explanation is cartographic error. We are told that early mapmakers simply made a mistake, and that subsequent generations of cartographers blindly copied that mistake for 4 centuries until modern satellites finally corrected the record. It is a comforting narrative. It suggests a steady march of human progress, where the ignorance of the past is illuminated by the technology of the present. But that explanation shatters the moment you examine the physical evidence. The survival of the island is not the mystery. What didn't survive was the paper trail, and the absence of any satisfying explanation for how an 80-square-mile landmass was systematically erased from institutional memory is where the real investigation begins. To understand why a simple mapmaker's error is impossible, you have to understand how maritime empires functioned in the 16th and 17th centuries. Maps were not public commodities. They were classified military assets. A precise map was the difference between dominating global trade and losing a fleet to a hidden reef. Bermeja first appears in the historical record in 1539, in a map published by Alonso de Santa Cruz, the most celebrated cartographer of the Spanish crown. Santa Cruz was not a man who dealt in rumours or mythological sea monsters. He was the royal cosmographer. His charts were built from the sworn, heavily interrogated testimonies of ship captains returning from the New World. In his registry, Bermeja is described as a small island with a distinct reddish hue, which is exactly what its name means in Spanish. By 1570, it appears again in the work of Francisco de Hoses. In 1644, it is explicitly named in a highly restricted maritime manual written by a Dutch navigator who spent his life mapping the treacherous waters of the Gulf. Let that sequence of dates sit for a moment. Spain and the Dutch Republic were engaged in a bitter, existential war during this period. They did not share naval intelligence. They actively destroyed each other's ships to prevent navigational charts from falling into enemy hands. And yet both rival empires independently documented the exact same reddish island at the exact same coordinates with the exact same navigational warnings. You've been told cartographers copied each other's mistakes to save time. Here is what that explanation does not account for, and why that specific gap matters. In the age of sail, copying a rival's map without verifying the coordinates was a death sentence. If an island was plotted incorrectly, ships carrying tons of gold and hundreds of men would crash in the dark. Navies spent vast fortunes sending survey vessels to confirm the existence of hazards. If an island did not exist, it was aggressively scrubbed from the registry to clear the sea lanes. Yet Bermeja remained. In 1775, the Spanish Admiralty dispatched a dedicated expedition to map the entire Gulf of Mexico with unprecedented precision. They used highly advanced marine chronometers. They took hundreds of depth soundings. When they published their master chart, Bermeja was right there, 22 degrees, 33 minutes north. In 1846, the British Royal Navy, the most paranoid, meticulous, and scientifically rigorous maritime force on the planet, published their own chart of the Gulf. The British Admiralty did not rely on Spanish records. They surveyed the waters themselves. Their map, drafted by John Purdy, clearly demarcates Bermeja. 10 years later, in 1856, the United States government published its definitive map of the region, drawn by E. Blunt. Bermeja is prominently featured. 3 rival nations. 3 independent naval surveys. 3 highly specific sets of documentation confirming the existence of a physical landmass. The probability of 3 hostile geopolitical powers sharing the exact same collective hallucination for 300 years deserves serious examination. But the mystery of Bermeja does not exist in isolation. It is part of a much larger, quietly documented pattern that official historical timelines rarely connect, and perhaps should. Across the globe, similar geographic anomalies began appearing. Islands that had been documented for centuries suddenly vanished from official records under highly specific, strategically convenient circumstances. In the Coral Sea, off the coast of Australia, there was Sandy Island, discovered by the French whaling ship Velvet in 1876, charted by the British Admiralty in 1908, confirmed by the Australian Hydrographic Service in 1922. It appeared on nearly every major world map for over a century. It was described as a crescent-shaped sandy atoll, approximately 15 miles long. In the North Pacific, there was Los Jardines, a small archipelago charted by Spanish explorers in 1528, confirmed by a British vessel in 1788, and mapped by American naval ships in the late 19th century. These were not dots on a speculative medieval canvas. These were hazards navigated by modern steamships. They were physical places. And then, in the 20th century, the pattern activates. Los Jardines vanished from official American maps in the early 1970s, right as the United States and the Soviet Union were establishing classified submarine transit lanes through the Pacific. No geological survey was published to explain its disappearance. The archipelago simply ceased to exist in the registry. Sandy Island survived until 2012, when an Australian scientific vessel deliberately sailed through its coordinates and declared it non-existent. The global cartographic community immediately accepted the finding. Google Earth quietly blacked out the pixels where the island used to be, replacing it with the dark blue of deep ocean. Different oceans, different centuries, different governments. Identical outcome. An island is mapped for hundreds of years by independent, highly credible sources. Then, without a satisfactory geological explanation, the island is declared an error and quietly erased from the institutional record. But it is the timeline of these erasures that changes everything. Because these islands did not disappear when satellite technology was invented in the 1960s. They disappeared when the legal definition of the ocean changed. In 1982, the United Nations finalized the Convention on the Law of the Sea. This treaty fundamentally altered the geography of the planet. It established the concept of the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Under this new international law, a country did not just own its land, it owned all the resources in the water and beneath the ocean floor, extending 200 nautical miles outward from any piece of land it controlled. Suddenly, a worthless rock in the middle of the ocean was no longer just a navigational hazard. It was a golden ticket. An island, no matter how small, granted its owner exclusive drilling and fishing rights to over 125,000 square miles of ocean. This is the exact moment when Bermeja became the most important island in the Western Hemisphere. In the late 1990s, the United States and Mexico were locked in tense, high-stakes negotiations over a region in the Gulf of Mexico known as the Hoyo de Monterrey. It was a massive, untapped geological formation. Seismic surveys indicated it contained 22 billion barrels of oil. It was one of the largest petroleum reserves on the planet. The border dividing this oil between the United States and Mexico had to be drawn based on the UN's 200-mile rule. For the United States, the boundary was measured from the coast of Louisiana. For Mexico, the boundary was supposed to be measured from its northernmost island. That island was Bermeja. Because of its specific location far out in the Gulf, Bermeja extended Mexico's exclusive economic zone dramatically northward. With Bermeja on the map, the vast majority of the 22 billion barrels of oil in the Hoyo de Monterrey belonged unequivocally to Mexico. The Clinton administration and the Zedillo administration were pushing to finalize the treaty. Billions of dollars were on the table. The math of the ocean floor was being calculated down to the millimeter, and then, in 1997, the Mexican government sent a naval survey vessel to Bermeja to officially register its coordinates for the treaty. The ship arrived at 22 degrees, 33 minutes north. They reported back that the island was gone. Because Bermeja was no longer there, Mexico had to measure its maritime border from the Alacranes Reef, located far to the south. The line shifted drastically. Mexico lost its claim to the lion's share of the Hoyo de Monterrey. In 2000, the two nations signed the treaty, effectively handing the United States jurisdiction over a massive portion of the oil reserves. This is precisely where the official explanation begins to develop fatal gaps. If Bermeja was simply a 400-year-old cartographic error, as the official narrative claims, why was the Mexican government relying on it to dictate its national borders in 1997? Governments do not base multi-billion-dollar international treaties on mythological islands. They base them on verified, classified geographic data. The institutional response to this disappearance is where the pattern becomes disturbing. In 2008, a Mexican senator named Julio Zamora became suspicious of the treaty. He noted the sheer mathematical improbability of multiple naval empires hallucinating the exact same landmass. He recognized the geopolitical convenience of the island's disappearance. He launched a formal inquiry, demanding access to the historical maps held in the National Archives. Imagine you are a researcher working for a federal senator in 2008. You walk into the General National Archive in Mexico City. You request the specific military folios from the 19th and early 20th centuries that contain the verified coastal surveys of the Gulf of Mexico. The documents that would definitively prove whether the Mexican Navy had physically visited the island before 1997. The archivists inform you that those specific folios are missing. Not misfiled. Not damaged by time. Missing. Zamora's investigation discovered a chilling sequence of erasures. It wasn't just the physical archives. Between 1998 and 2008, Bermeja was systematically scrubbed from digital databases worldwide. The CIA World Factbook, which had previously listed the island, silently removed it without an errata notice. Private mapping agencies updated their digital charts. The erasure was quiet, comprehensive, and global. When the Mexican public found out about the missing island and the missing oil, there was an outcry. The government was forced to respond. In 2009, they commissioned a massive scientific expedition led by the National Autonomous University of Mexico. They sent 3 ships equipped with state-of-the-art multi-beam sonar to thoroughly scan the ocean floor where Bermeja was supposed to be. They scanned an area of 400 square miles. They found nothing. The official conclusion was published. Bermeja never existed. The centuries of maps were declared a cascading error. The missing archive files were dismissed as poor bureaucratic record-keeping. The timing of the disappearance, right when the oil treaty was signed, was labelled an unfortunate coincidence. But that conclusion ignores the physical proof that still exists today. Because while you can alter digital databases, and while you can lose files in a national archive, you cannot destroy every antique map in existence. Private collections and independent museums around the world still hold the original physical charts drawn by the British Admiralty and the US Navy in the 1800s. You can look at them yourself. You can see the heavy, deliberate ink pressing the island into reality. You can read the depth soundings written around the perimeter of the island. Let that detail sit for a moment. Depth soundings. When a 19th century naval vessel mapped an island, they didn't just draw a circle. They dropped heavy lead weights attached to measured ropes to determine the depth of the water around the landmass. This was brutal, physical labour. The 1846 British map and the 1856 American map both feature precise numerical depth soundings surrounding Bermeja, gradually getting shallower as they approach the coast. How does a cartographer forge gradual depth soundings around an island that isn't there? How does a sailor measuring a 3,000-foot drop accidentally write down a 30-foot reef? They built their geopolitical reality using these measurements. The math does not resolve cleanly. And nobody has offered a fully satisfying explanation. If Bermeja existed, where did it go? Some geologists who refused to accept the cartographic error theory proposed that global warming and rising sea levels simply swallowed the island. But a sea level rise of a few inches cannot conceal an island that was historically visible from miles away. Others suggested a massive seismic event, an earthquake that shattered the limestone foundation of the island and dragged it into the abyss. But the 2009 sonar scan found no rubble, no submerged peak, no geological debris field, just a flat, deep ocean floor. Which leaves only two possibilities. Both are deeply unsettling. The first possibility is that the greatest maritime explorers, navigators, and scientists in human history, across 3 centuries and multiple rival empires, were entirely incompetent. It means that the fundamental geographic data upon which modern nations were built is based on rumours, shadows, and shared delusions. It means that even when men physically dropped lead weights into the ocean to measure the truth, they recorded a lie. The second possibility is far more complex. Consider what the erasure meant for the people whose history it contained. Within a single human lifetime, the geographic reality of an entire region changed completely. The politicians who negotiated the old borders retired. The navigators who remembered the old charts died. Their grandchildren were told those memories were a mistake, and the documents that would have proven otherwise went missing from the archive. This is the nature of institutional erasure. It does not happen with a loud explosion. It happens in silence. A file is misplaced. A digital polygon is coloured blue instead of green. A treaty is signed behind closed doors. And suddenly, reality is whatever the surviving map says it is. We live in an era where we believe the world is fully known. We have satellites orbiting the Earth, photographing every inch of the surface. We map the craters of the moon with greater clarity than our ancestors mapped their own coastlines. We trust the digital screens in our pockets to tell us exactly where we are and exactly what is around us. But the screen only shows what the database allows it to show. The sequence repeats. Different century, different government, same structural outcome. Sandy Island vanishes precisely when exclusive economic zones are being contested in the Coral Sea. Los Jardines disappears just as submarine corridors are partitioned. Bermeja is wiped away the moment 22 billion barrels of oil are discovered on its border. The question is not whether the pattern exists. The pattern is documented. The timeline is undeniable. The geopolitical consequences are measurable in the billions of dollars. The question is what we are supposed to conclude from it. We are told that we have mastered the map. We are told that the shadows of the unknown have been permanently banished by the bright light of modern technology. But technology is merely a tool. It is controlled by institutions, and institutions are driven by interests that have nothing to do with objective truth. If an 80-square-mile island, documented by 3 empires and protected by international law, can simply be willed out of existence when it becomes economically inconvenient. What else is missing? Imagine you are standing on the deck of a ship, looking out at the exact coordinates where Alonso de Santa Cruz swore an island stood. The wind is the same wind he felt. The water is the same water he sailed. You look down into the deep, unbroken blue. You are told there is nothing there. You are told there was never anything there. But beneath the water, beneath the politics, beneath the digital maps that guide our modern lives, a vast and silent history remains submerged. The official record is closed. The treaties are signed. The oil is being pumped. The map has been corrected. But the coordinates wait in the dark.